Don't let this be the end of keys. Come on. Oh, shit. No. Come on, Silver Team. No, not like this, keys. I don't know what that means now for the events of Halo CE. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00, and today I'm giving my thoughts and theories on Episode 4, Reach of Halo Season 2. And this is a hell of an episode. There is a huge amount of action and a huge amount of things to unpack, as well as some decisions that I'm both for and some decisions I'd say I'm against them, but I think I understand the motivations behind them, so to speak. So again, on the onset, there's going to be spoilers. If you haven't seen Episode 4 already, it's on Paramount+. Go and watch it now, and then come back and watch the thoughts and theories that I have on Episode 4. So from this point, throughout, spoilers. Now, as I've done on the previous 3 episodes, thankfully I'm now up to speed, and I'm actually releasing them on the day of the actual episode, which is, progress. I've got some notes, I've got quite a lot of notes on exactly what's gone on in this episode, so I will be referring to those. I thank you all for your comments and for interacting with the past 3 videos, even though they were kind of well out of time for the release of the episode, so I'm hoping this will kind of strike while the iron's hot, so to speak. Now, again, with the previous episodes, we tackled things by grouping them into events. So anything happening with like John and Silver Team would be grouped, and then anything going on with like Quan and Soren would be in another one, and so on and so forth. So we group them into main storylines. The thing with Episode 4 is that all of these storylines are really starting to blend together, and they all come together and culminate in this episode, or most of them. So as opposed to grouping them together into separate storylines, as we did in the previous 3 episodes, this one we will actually be tackling on a scene-by-scene basis. So you can kind of follow along if you have the episode on hand. So let's get on with it. So we kick the episode off with Vanek ultimately paying off his whole wildlife documentary personality trait enjoyment that's kind of been cropping up as a consequence of him removing his hormone regulator pellet from the base of his spine. His personality has come on leaps and bounds in this season alone. I've got to admit, I know that in Season 1, people liked Vanek because he was, in most people's eyes, what a Spartan should be. He was no nonsense, very stoic, didn't say a lot, to the point, very rarely took off his helmet. He was kind of the consummate Spartan, so to speak. People seem to gravitate towards Vanek in Season 1. I sort of didn't gravitate to him quite as much in Season 1. I still liked his character, but it lacked the depth that I was kind of seeking, so to speak, at that point. The knock-on effect to, however, removing the hormone chip in the start of Season 2, however, is that we're seeing much more of Vanek. We're seeing more of his personality come forward, and it's a really good personality. It's really good characterization, and I like the unique little perks and little things that are unique to each Spartan that are coming out, so to speak, as a consequence of this. So it's great to see, and having this paid off, but this particular little scene is ultimately interrupted by the beginning of the attack of Reach, and I'm assuming this scene happens simultaneously to last episode's scene where Chief and Perez were in the church, because the explosion that goes on outside, I believe, is the same explosion that Vanek sees from a different perspective. So it kind of sets the scene of where things are. The very next scene, we see Chief protecting Perez. Again, this is very much in line with what Master Chief, what John is all about. He will always protect the soldiers under his command or nearby him. It goes back to those 3 ways in which the Master Chief responds to people around him. That was highlighted in, I believe, the Fall of Reach, and that's that if you're an enemy, he would destroy you. If you're a friend, he would help you, and if you were a commanding officer, he would follow you. That's the three ways that John knows how to respond to people. He's treating Perez both as a fellow soldier, someone he would help, but also someone he needs to protect. So again, on point for Chief's characterization. Moving on from this, we get Halsey and Soren that are still imprisoned together, and they know that something's happening because it's very similar to Jurassic Park when the T-Rex is coming in the water, is shaking on the glass. Soren is noticing the vibrations from the explosions outside. Now, they've evidently been in contact with each other. This encounter has been going on for a while because obviously we saw Ackerson introduce Soren into this room in the previous episode, and then towards the latter end of that episode, Ackerson was leaving Reach as part of the top brass VIPs, essential assets that needed to get off Reach before it was attacked. So evidently Halsey and Soren have been together like this for a while, and they haven't killed each other, or more accurately, Soren hasn't killed Halsey. So evidently their encounter went a lot more amicably than I was expecting it to. There's a slight discrepancy with the room size here. There's a moment where obviously the explosion causes some of the power to fail, and that causes the holographic projections to fail. And there's a discrepancy with the room size in that Halsey and Soren are stood near the step up into a large bay window, and yet when the hologram fails, they're literally against a wall. Now again, I suppose, the holographic would just simply mean you wouldn't be able to move to that part of the room. You'd encounter that wall and it would feel like an invisible barrier. So it kind of makes sense within the context, but it's just something that jumped out at me in that scene, basically. The next scene, we get Perez starting to absorb what's going on. Obviously, the explosion and Chief protecting Perez and pulling her away. The explosion that we saw happened at her residential complex, so her family and her friends are likely dead, as Chief alluded to in the previous scene, and in this one that's starting to hit her. It's starting to hit home what's going on. Initially, I thought this scene was actually in place to show Chief is still struggling with the ways to relate to other humans. They're struggling with his humanity, as again he outlined with the virtual brothel thing that we saw, where he doesn't know how to talk to people. I thought initially that's what this scene was doing, but again, upon rewatching that scene, I think it's less about that and more to do with Chief's true character shining through. The Chief kind of we quote unquote know and love, the one from the games. I say this because obviously Perez is upset and she's emotional, and you notice that when the camera orbits around to show Pablo, to show John stood there, note there's a steady stare, a stoicism, and he maintains that calm response. Now, I saw this scene, and it was oddly, for me at least, it was very easy to look at Pablo, to look at John stood there, and almost superimpose, almost imagine overlaying Chief's armor onto Pablo. And it was odd. It was an odd scene for me because I was watching John respond to Perez in the way we know the Master Chief responds to people, especially when they're emotional. We've seen him do this quite a few times with other characters in the games. It was a very odd moment for me because it was almost like I was watching the Master Chief, but I could see through his armor, if you know what I mean. I was watching the Master Chief we know and love from the games, stood there doing his stoic response, maintaining that steady stare, the calm stoic responses, and it was literally almost like I could picture Master Chief's armor over Pablo, but I could see through it. It's a really odd scene, and I think that the reason that is happening, or the reason I felt this way in regards to this scene, is because they nailed how Chief responds to people in that scene. They nailed his characterization in that scene. Everything about the way he holds himself, the way he stood, the way he maintains that steady stare, everything about that was so atypically Master Chief that it wasn't even Uncanny Valley, and that's why it was so easy for me to superimpose Chief's suit over the top of him and feel like I could see through it, like his suit was made of glass almost. So for me, that's a really, really big step, a big jump in the right direction for me to better so easily feel that, and I'd love to hear what you thought about that particular scene, if you had a similar kind of experience, or if not, I'd love to hear why as well. We chase this with the scene of Chief and Perez moving through seemingly the same place that Chief was in a couple of episodes back, where it's like the public area with the arcade nearby, and then the elites arrive and things break out. Now, seeing what a Spartan can do out of armor, phenomenal. I was absolutely enthralled with seeing how this would play out. Seeing John literally like almost rugby tackling an elite and grappling in hand-to-hand combat was just phenomenal, and it highlights just how powerful he is as a Spartan. Oof. Let's see what an unarmored fucking Spartan can do. Shit. Spartans out of armor, at least in this context, seem like they're as strong as elites. Now that's actually slightly removed from mainline lore. It's established in mainline lore that the elites wear combat harnesses that, at least as far as we're aware, don't really give them any additional power assist like Master Chief's armor does. And in the mainline lore, it's suggested that a Spartan in their armor is as strong as an elite who doesn't wear a combat harness that aids them in any great degree in strength. So it levels the playing field and makes it so a Spartan and an elite are equivalent. Yet in this, it demonstrates that a Spartan is as powerful as a Sangheili out of armor. So that almost boosts and increases the performance output of the Spartans in the Silver Timeline, which is interesting to see. And I'll also mention that the combat harness, in particular, that these elites are wearing, they look fantastic. I was okay with the design from Season 1, but the design here, bang on. I'm loving the design of the elites in Season 2 so far. We then get back to Halsey and Soren trying to escape what is the only facility, I assume, inside of High Command, but Soren is really resisting trusting Halsey. And really, that's the only purpose of that scene. It's a really brief scene just to establish that Soren is not on board with trusting Halsey, even though Halsey has an intimate experience of this facility and knows her way around. That's the only reason that this scene exists. The following scene, we see John and Perez moving through the shops or a residential area of Reach, trying to make their way towards High Command. And again, we see this physicality of Chief body blocking Perez. He's got like a modern day axe, and he's literally like he's crossed it across her body to kind of keep her in place almost. And he's ready to attack whatever the hell comes through the door. Can you imagine a Spartan swinging a freaking axe? What kind of damage that would cause? Jesus. Anyway, this innate instinct to protect is what makes Master Chief who he is. So again, this is atypical perfect characterization. Huge steps in the right direction. The scene then quietens down for a moment, and John actually himself pitches that concept of luck, of being the lucky Spartan. And he does it in a way that I've never actually thought about before. I've never put it together in this way before. But I'm really glad they took the opportunity to do it in this episode, because it references that the coin toss and it happened before John was kidnapped for the Spartan program, and it was Halsey herself with Jacob Keyes in the background who approached John while he was at school and played this coin toss game with him. And 11 coin tosses, 11 heads, correct guesses every single time. Now, 11 heads in a row, that means that it's a probability of 0.0488% chance of that actually happening, of being able to correctly call 11 heads in a row, which means it's a 1 in 2048 chance of that happening, which isn't astronomical odds, to be fair. It's actually much more conservative than I was expecting, but we'll get to that in a minute. John speaks on his luck, but he speaks on his luck as a burden, and I've never thought of it like that before. I've always thought John's luck is what makes him special, but it's like his quote-unquote superpower. Arguably speaking, it's his plot armor within the games. We know it is, but the luck in that context, you've always viewed upon as it being the method by which John has won battle after battle after battle after battle, and that's true. That is true, but he speaks of it being a burden because he speaks like that when they were doing the coin toss game. It wasn't that he guessed that it was heads 11 times. He knew it was heads 11 times, which suggests that like he just knows how things are going to turn out. It maybe suggests that he's just able to perceive information that much quicker. He can actually see the coin toss in the air and knew what way up it was going to land, or more unlikely, he was actually willing it to happen that way, that's very metaphysical. But the thing is, even Halsey referenced that in the book The Fall of Reach. Even Halsey referenced those tropes, those ideas of how he was responding to that coin toss thing. But because he knew the result of the coin toss, he goes on to say that he knows going into battle that he's going to lose people he cares about, but he knows every single time that it's not going to be him. And when Perez counters, sounds nice, he responds, not really. And it suddenly drives home that it's a survivorship guilt. And this is something that's very prevalent with PTSD, with veterans who have served active combat and have come off the front lines. It's strange. Almost all soldiers who have fought active combat have some degree of PTSD as a consequence. It seemingly is just part of what happens. The human mind isn't really meant to experience that kind of combat, that kind of level of horror and trauma. So most soldiers get PTSD, and something that I've found is extremely prevalent through veterans specifically is a survivorship guilt. The idea of all of my brothers and sisters died, but I didn't. Why? I should have died instead of them. They should be here, not me. And that's an awful burden to carry as a veteran, and is actually one of the motivating factors behind the unfortunately extraordinarily high suicide rates of veterans. And there's just not enough mental health support for veterans. And driving those tones, those themes in this was something I just wasn't expecting to be confronted with. But I'm so glad that they did, because it gives perspective both on John, his luck, and how he views it as a burden, but also gives, quite rightfully, a spotlight to those suffering with PTSD as a consequence of military service and of seeing active combat. And that was a depth, that was a deep moment that I was not expecting to have in this episode, but I'm really thankful that it did. So I have to put full credit to the writers and full credit to the showrunner for having the self-awareness almost to write this into the script and drive this forward as a key point of the episode. Absolute props and credit to you. It's fantastic. I've got family and friends who have served. I've got friends who are serving. I respect the fact that they went to this length to put that out there. Moving on. So it gets worse. It gets worse. So we get these this shopkeeper has got a shop of 20th century and 21st century possessions. I mean, the chief is holding a modern day axe, as in our real world now modern day axe, and there are typewriters and all sorts of things in that shop that we recognise immediately as being stuff that we use in our day-to-day lives now and have relatively recently used in recent history. Phenomenal little world building thing to look at our modern day stuff with a degree of, oh look, this is vintage, this is almost archaic now. It's really odd, but a nice way to do it. And it goes on to the idea of these themes of things that matter. You know, if we don't think anything matters, then we don't matter. It's driving at these ideas of PTSD and what it is to be human in wartime. And we go on to realise that she's going to make a willing sacrifice. She knows what matters to her, and that's enough for her to stand for it, to stand by what she feels matters, and she ultimately will stay in that shop around those possessions, and she will fall with Reach, which is a noble cause, to stand for something that you believe in, stand for something that you care about, and fall on your sword in the process. It's part of this recurring theme. And I also duly note that there's actually a Halo CE Edition Xbox. It's right there, in those final moments. Great product placement, love it. Just thought that was a nice little Easter egg to make note of. Moving on from that, we get Halsey's interest in Soren's kid, Kessler. And her interest in that is basically that she wants to know if his genetics have passed on to Kessler, but also if some of the augmentations, because some of the augmentations were genetic in nature. She wanted to know if some of those augmentations have passed on to Kessler, because in theory, Kessler could be what they call a Spartan 2.1, as I recall, or a Spartan. Yes, a Spartan 2.1, because a Spartan 1.1 was the children of the Orion candidates. A child of a Spartan 2 would be a Spartan 2.1, where some of those genetic augmentations, some of the chemical augmentation, things like that, actually pass on, so to speak, and then you have children who are in some respects, not all respects, but in some respects, superhuman, or they have something about them that is impressive. Kessler may just be such a child. So her interest manifests from there, basically. Halsey's character in this is actually becoming less of the war criminal black and white sociopath, so to speak, that we've seen in Season 1, and she's starting to edge into this more morally grey area, Halsey, that I was so used to reading about in the books. It's a return to form, and I wasn't expecting to have this. I was expecting to continue to love to hate this version of Halsey, but this is changing to her becoming more like the morally grey Halsey I'm used to and accustomed to. Back with Chief, and outside the battle is raging, and it's appropriately chaotic. The handheld camera, the tight shots really grounds you, makes you feel like you're in the action and you're right there with them. The cinematography in this series of sequences is fantastic and really does anchor you into the moment. This feels so chaotic. It's accurate. It's lore accurate. It's battle accurate. It's real life accurate. Seeing Riz full autoing a turret while not wearing armour was boss as fuck. I will quickly note there's a very brief moment where there's a VFX failure where the background behind John can actually be seen through Pablo's head. It's not ideal, not an ideal moment, but I thought it worth mentioning. I also note that Lewis is here. Lewis is blind. He might be an ex-Spartan, but he's an ex-Spartan because he went blind through retinal detachment. Why in the hell is this man in a war zone? And why has he got a grenade launcher? There's no way in hell that a blind man would be allowed anywhere near a war zone, much less with a weapon in his hand, because he could just as easily fire a grenade into friendly forces. I mean, he can't see them, so okay. I also duly note here that we're seeing battle rifles being fired full auto for the first time, which is actually a setting of the battle rifle. The battle rifle can be in the lore set from single shot, a 3-shot burst, and full auto. We're seeing them in full auto here. Just nice to see that finally being realised. I'll eat my words because we then get a shot of Lewis just casually destroying 3 elites with a grenade launcher. Surprisingly epic. I'm here for it. I like it. They then move into more tight, close quarters areas, and the more confined combat is tense. There's a good flow from moment to moment as the battle progresses through this interior space. And we see Lewis's partner, unfortunately, KIA, and then Riz tosses a grenade, clears the area, and then jumps out the window that the rest of them have jumped out of. I just want to duly note here, they actually fall a good couple of stories. So, how did Perez survive that? Exactly. Was it a case of like Chief jumped out the window and grabbed her and just landed on his back, or what was it? Because Perez should have rightly been quite injured from a fall of that size. We finally get to see a Wraith, a live-action Wraith, well, CG, but live-action Wraith in situ, which is like phenomenal, and they're a lot bigger than you think they are due to the force perspective of first-person perspective in the games. They're a lot bigger, and then once Lewis realizes that his partner had died, it gives him the motivation to sacrifice himself to stop the Wraith and to buy the others the clearance they need to get clear. It's actually a really powerful scene. Much more powerful than I was expecting, especially because we've only had really a very few scenes with Lewis, but his betrayal and the way he's expressed himself is really quite endearing. So when he makes this ultimate sacrifice to stop the Wraith, it's actually pretty powerful. You don't actually see it directly, you just see the effects of it, but it's powerful, and it drives home the desperation of the situation. Halsey and Soren finally find Cortana, and Cortana is actually being taken by McKee and the Arbiter. Now, her being taken should not be allowed to happen. That's in contravention to the Cole Protocol. So the capture of a shipborne AI, which is technically what Cortana is absolutely unacceptable, which means there has to be a recovery op, or at least asset denial, which means that we are inevitably going to get a mission where I would imagine Silver Team board a Covenant ship. So we're actually likely in this season going to see the inside of a Covenant ship for the first time, which is going to be, I really hope it's like along the same lines of kind of Truth and Reconciliation like style interior. So that's going to be phenomenal to see. We finally arrive at FleetCom with Chief, and again we're seeing this war through the eyes of the characters. You get this moment where Riz is evidently starting to feel the loss and the trauma of the war so far, particularly because she bonded quite closely with Lewis, and him now being dead kind of drives that home to her. And again, although this isn't the first time that the Spartans are feeling, so to speak, combat, this, it's still relatively fresh for the Spartans. They removed their pellets and they're feeling this for the first time. Little narrative thread that people didn't like from season 1, but it's there and it needs to be addressed, at least in some regard. So she's starting to feel that loss and trauma of war, if only for lingering moments. John then actually tosses the coin that he's got over to Perez for luck, and he actually states heads as he walks away. Now, assuming that he was right, and we've got no reason to assume that he wasn't, that means that he's correctly guessed, if you account the original 11 and then that one as well, that's 12 guesses for heads in a row. And just that addition of one more coin toss actually doubles the probabilities. So that's now 1 in 4,096. Nice little moment. He still doesn't quite know how to say goodbye, but it was a nice gesture nonetheless. And then Silver Team finally meet up, and the absence of Kai is acknowledged. Now, this pretty much guarantees, as far as I'm concerned, that Kai has gone to Onyx, possibly with Ackerson, possibly alone, but she's almost undoubtedly gone to Onyx to recover the Spartan 3s and bring them back to Reach. It's also in this moment that it's revealed that all of their armour is gone. It's been taken, seemingly by Ackerson. He likely took it with him when he left, which means the Spartans are now without their armour due to Ackerson's involvement, due to Ackerson's manipulations, which is not an ideal scenario because without their armour, they are somewhat at risk. They're still superhuman, but they're not as effective as they could be if they were wearing their armour. Next, we get Keyes still being on Reach and being kind of the de facto commanding officer in the area. And we get John being exonerated, being proven to be actually accurate, that the Covenant were on Reach and they were at the Visegrad Relay, and Keyes confirms that Cobalt Team were KIA at the Visegrad Relay. And apparently at least 2 of them didn't manage to even squeeze off a round. They were attacked, they were completely blindsided, taken unaware, and 2 of them didn't even get to fire their weapons. 2 of their weapons still had full ammo. So that goes to show just how lethal I assume the Arbiter and his local forces are at taking down Spartans. There's also a little conversation here where they discuss that the priority is keeping the MAX stations still active, because the MAX stations are in orbit, they're powered by generators on the ground, so generator defense is a high priority. That was a high priority in the Fall of Reach, the book, as well. A lot of Spartans were dispatched to protect those generators, to keep them up, because the second they fall, the Covenant just pour in. As long as they have orbital defense, they can at least try to keep the Covenant forces back, or at least delay them. Keyes' characterization here is fantastic. He never shies away from the battle, and he's known for pulling off extremely impressive feats. So the characterization of Keyes here, choosing to remain behind with the forces and lead them, it's on point. We get a shot here of Soren helping Halsey back up and then demanding clarity on what she meant in the previous scene. And she hints that Soren was likely to be the leader of the Spartans. This is very different from established lore. It was always thought of as the Master Chief was going to be the leader. John was going to be the leader. From the moment that Halsey first met him, she knew that. So this is a very big step away from the deeper lore, the deeper narrative. But the fact that Halsey then pivoted when she realised that Soren perhaps wasn't going to stay the course, and made John the de facto leader and tried to get John to believe in himself to become that leader. Again, this is going back to the idea that Chief is more than just a soldier that follows orders. He is to be the leader, he is to be the saviour of humanity, and he needs to realise that. He has to have the belief in himself and the faith in himself to realise that. So this is kind of the payoff, so to speak, of building up that narrative so far. And we also go another step further where she makes it clear that it was her that made sure that Soren's way was clear, which again paints her to be that morally grey character. This is very much an interesting development for Halsey's character beyond being the war criminal narrative that we've been getting so far, the whole sociopathic narcissist. And I'm intrigued where this will go in the long term. We again have these moments of seeing the battle through the eyes of the characters. So Perez here is evidently numb from the battle. She's experiencing the onset of PTSD, or at least maybe shell shock in the moment. While the others around her are continuing to kind of flinch from the explosions going on outside, she's just passive to it. She's numb to it. And again, that just circles back to these ideas of shell shock, PTSD. It's an ongoing narrative for practically all of this episode. Keyes then gives a rallying speech. The marine armour looks really good here, actually, I'll say. It looks like heavy and chunky, but still in keeping with the aesthetic that we're used to for being Halo. I will say the speech, the theming, the music, the battle so far, the loss, the sacrifices so far, all culminate in this scene. And for me, at least, was the emotional release, so to speak, of everything building up to this point. Keyes' delivery, the way he introduces John 117 as the Master Chief, actually serves a few purposes. So, one, it's to get the local forces to acknowledge him as another leader. It's an obvious thing. Two, it's also to motivate them, because at this point, the legend of the Master Chief is already so prevalent across the UNSC that actually introducing him out of armor and saying, you know, he's here as the warrior, you know, he's fighting with the warrior inside of him. He doesn't need his armor, so to speak, in this circumstance. Trying to turn what was a forced situation of Ackerson's manipulation into something that can motivate the troops. Again, very much on point. When Spartans appeared on a battlefield, it motivated people. They rallied to support the Spartan and took on risks that under normal circumstances they wouldn't have. But that motivation, that morale boost, was absolutely pivotal in some of the key battles of the War of the Covenant. And you can see the way they look back and forth between each other. They're excited and they're motivated to see him. And then finally, the third reason that this is done, it's a way to unify the identities of John and Master Chief. Now, the narrative that's been being pushed by Ackerson specifically thus far seems to be pushing towards this idea that the Master Chief is the important part of this kind of recipe, so to speak. John is just a dude in a suit. It's the Master Chief that's the icon. Who's wearing the suit inside doesn't really matter. And of course, we know, and Chief needs to believe in himself, and the normal rank and file know, that it's the man inside the suit that is exceptional. It's not just the suit that's fantastically powerful. The guy inside is as well. And we've seen scenes over and over again through this season so far that demonstrate exactly that. Scenes where Chief hasn't been in armor, but has been exceptional. This is just one of those moments where Keyes is turning what Ackerson's rhetoric has been, where Master Chief matters, John doesn't really matter, he's just a dude in a suit. This is Keyes taking that opportunity to seize that back and turn it back around and actually present, no, John is the Master Chief. They are one and the same person, and they both matter, so to speak. It unifies them from a personable standpoint. This is the narrative that we and those who know the Spartans know to be true. And Keyes here, galvanizing this in his speech, sets Chief up to be the leader and the icon and the savior of humanity that we ultimately know he will become, and that he needs to believe and have faith in himself to become. And yeah, I will admit, this speech, I shed some tears here. It hit me. Again, I've got family and friends who've served and who are serving. This scene, its delivery, its poignancy, and everything going on around it, alongside these running themes of the consequences of war, PTSD, shell shock, it hit very close to home. And this scene, it paid it off emotionally for me, and I'm sure it will and has for many, many others. I also like here that Chief takes the moment to ask Keyes to get off of World and to leave the fighting to them, because they can't afford to lose him and they'll need him. And they're absolutely correct. Captain Jacob Keyes, in this case Admiral Keyes, is integral to the events that are going to play out in due course. Humanity needs Keyes. And Chief, absolutely right here to say, get off World. We need you to live. We need you to continue being alive so you can continue to give orders. It's right. You know what's coming. I will note the bridge scene here, so familiar. And the reason why I say that is because I wrote a scene almost exactly like this in my like kind of fan fiction series Fireteam Ares. So I kind of feel like at this point someone's just copying my work. So, you know, the Halo TV show plagiarizing me is, yeah, it's not happening. I know it's not.
This feels very Fireteam Ares.
It is. It's a bridge. It's a long bridge.
It is. I wrote about this in Fireteam Ares. Jesus.
Someone's copying my work. Also, there's a freaking scorpion. How cool is that? Halsey and Jacob meet up for the first time in a long time once again. And Soren sliding in the way that he does is actually hilarious. The comedic side of Soren is starting to come out a little bit more. This is playing into my theory that Soren might step into the role of Johnson in Season 3. Even in the elevator, the little quips and like comedic lines continue. And it's, again, nice to see Soren's character developing in that kind of a way. Again, the theory was quite prevalent in my previous episode that Soren might end up becoming Johnson's kind of character through season 3 and beyond, and I know a lot of you were in agreement with that you'd actually quite like that to happen. I know a few people said they don't want that to happen, but I don't know. It's playing into the theory. I think it's starting to make me believe that might be where it's going. I don't know. Also, during the scene, Miranda is mentioned, and as we know from the mainline lore and the Silver Timeline, Miranda is Jacob and Halsey's child. Miranda isn't at FleetCom, and her whereabouts are seemingly classified. I had some thoughts on this when I first saw this scene, but were changed by a happening later on in this episode, so we'll circle back to that. Jackals arrive at the FleetCom tower, and Soren does what he can to help out the other people there. This is, again, kind of a trait that's almost bred into the Spartans to be protectors, to be a warrior, and Soren kind of just steps into that role here once more. Again, it feels like something of a redemption arc for Soren, that he's been this pirate, he's been on the periphery of the war, now he's on Reach, he's in the thick of it, he's here with John and Silver Team and the other Spartans, and he's fighting this battle. He's now become part of this war. I don't know. It might play to things. We keep popping back to the bridge and seeing the battle continuing to rage on, and that's when Silver Team actually called to help out with the extraction due to the Jackals now attacking FleetCom Tower and preventing the evacuation of civilians. This now gets onto one of the big scenes I wanted to talk about for this episode, and that's at FleetCom Tower. Now, the forces are very quickly being overwhelmed by the Jackals that are flooding into FleetCom Tower. And the ship that Keyes and the civilians are on, that they're trying to get off the ground to get away and evacuate the colony, isn't ready to take off because it's got an override because the fuel line outside is still connected. So Keyes opts to leave the ship to unlock the fuel lines. The battle turns in the favour of the Covenant very, very rapidly, and Keyes is left surrounded by the Jackals, whom don't actually just attack him. They kind of stand off, and I'm not exactly sure why. I suppose it's just to drive home the particular scene, but I don't know if Jackals would do that conventionally. In either case, he primes the fuel line for release and it falls away, and it begins to leak the fuel for the ship, which I assume is deuterium. It's a form of gas. It begins to leak all around him to the point that you can start seeing it like wavering on the screen, and he tells the ship to leave. And when Perez finally agrees and pushes the throttles to max, it ignites the fuel, and Keyes dies.
Don't let this be the end of Keyes. Come on. Oh, shit. No. Come on, Silver Team. No, not like this, Keyes. I don't know what that means now for the events of Halo CE.
I don't think it was the right choice to kill Keyes, narratively speaking. I understand a couple of things about why this choice was made, but we'll get to that anyway. The death of Jacob Keyes at this stage, while it's pretty powerful, causes some significant problems for the narrative, the long-term narrative. Keyes, obviously, as we know, is the captain of the Pillar of Autumn. He takes Chief and the survivors of Reach off of the planet in the Pillar of Autumn and arrives at Halo. And many of the key moments of the events of Halo CE kind of circle around Captain Keyes. So most of that cannot happen without Jacob Keyes, or rather it could happen, but it wouldn't have the same level of emotional payoff. It's also worth noting that Keyes is something of a father figure to the Spartans, so him dying on Reach means that some other captain would have to fill his place. And I'm afraid no matter who that is, it won't have the same emotional context, or the same narrative direction even, as using Keyes would have. I mean, I can already see it now that when, or rather at this stage, if we get a Season 3, whomever fills that role will not be received the same way as Captain Jacob Keyes would have been. And even if they are, the emotional payoff will be that much more dialed back as a consequence of it not being Jacob. I will say this though, that the moment of his death is still emotional and powerful. His pipe makes an appearance and he asks for a light and then boom. Halsey's reaction to his death is very visceral. She, in both the Silver Timeline and in the mainline canon, still has great affection for Jacob Keyes. So seeing her break the way that she does from this it adds to that morally grey characterization that I so love of the Halsey that I read about in the books. And seeing that shift of the Silver Timeline Halsey from being that kind of sociopathic narcissist, black and white war criminal kind of mentality, to kind of coming back to that morally grey area Halsey that I read about is refreshing. It's genuinely refreshing, and I'm curious to see where that goes. Soren's direct involvement in these scenes and bringing together the different disparate narratives of this season so far is also great to see, but it's soured by the potential ramification of Keyes' death. I have a theory on what happens next, but I'll get to that in my summary, and I understand reasons why they may have done it, but again, we'll get to that in the summary. Next, we get a full close quarters engagement, and we get to see Chief kind of at his physical best outside of his armour. Great to see. Really well choreographed. Sort of the long shots, the long sort of flowing shots. Fantastic to see. Again, this out of armour demonstration of strength and speed drives this point that the Spartans are more than just guys in suits. Soren quipping, "A friend of yours," is obviously a callback to Keyes during the recovery footage of Jenkins in Halo CE. But we also see a turn here where before we saw Chief out of armour dominating other Sangheili, we see a shift here where Chief is evidently at a disadvantage versus the Arbiter, which also highlights the need for Mjolnir to level the playing field with more capable soldiers like the Arbiter. I like that the Arbiter and the Chief kind of battle, and the fact that another elite gets involved and shoots Chief and kind of steals away and denies the Arbiter the joy of killing the Chief himself, angers him to the point that he actually cuts the other elite's head off. That's, again, pretty on point for the Sangheili and the honour and conduct that they have in battle. McKee stopping the Arbiter from killing Chief, and then she and John coming somewhat face to face, is a moment that I didn't expect to be happening at all going on in this season, given that we watched her die at the end of season 1. So, I don't know. Then we get Vanek's sacrifice. The needle round in the chest and then detonating is an awful moment. And the fact that you have that delayed reaction of the needler as well, that moment of waiting for the inevitable, really, really rests heavily. The close-up shots of each other's expression, of Chief's expression, of Vanek's expression, really drives home that, oh shit, kind of moment, And then when it finally does go, you get Chief shout, and then we have a deafening silence that follows, which again drives home that sense of loss and sacrifice.
No, Vanek, no.
I'll also note this is the loss of a character whom many have really gravitated towards and have enjoyed their character development. While Vanek was kind of a no-nonsense Spartan, very stoic through and through in Season 1, that little flicker of care and compassion that he has towards Riz at the very end of Season 1, even when he still has his pellet implanted, that little flicker of care that he had was very telling for his character, so to speak. And then on top of that, the character development that we've seen in this season and the exploration of his own personality has genuinely been a joy to see. And I'm actually pretty devastated that Vanek's story is over already. And the thing is, the wound to the chest looks deep, but it doesn't look terribly visceral, so to speak. It doesn't look too quote unquote mortal. I know it's literally a hole in his chest, but you know what I'm saying. So one could argue that if he was recovered quick enough and put into cryo and then medically treated thereafter, we've had Spartans who have been injured to a similar degree as Vanek here and have lived. But evidently this isn't going to happen. They don't drag Vanek's body away and get him into cryo. That just doesn't happen here. So I do think that's the end of Vanek, and I think that's a big loss. It's a big loss. Again, the idea that you've got to lose members of Silver Team, I suppose. It's got to drive home how high the stakes are and that Spartans will fall during this. It has to. I just wasn't ready for it, and I'm upset that we don't get to see more of Vanek, basically. McKee lingers, but ultimately just turns and walks off, and we have zero explanation of how or why she's even still alive. So McKee's storyline right now, I can't get along with. That being said, given that she was dead in the last season, but now she's somehow back, I guess it's always a possibility that Keyes and Vanek will turn up in season 3. Please don't make it one of those kinds of shows that the characters die and are inexplicably back the next season with nothing said about it. It destroys the gravitas of the death and the sacrifice in that moment if they just come back the following season. And we really don't need another Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. where Coulson died at the end of every season and was inexplicably back the next. We don't need that. That shouldn't be what Halo is. And then finally we get the lingering scene of Vanek and staring up through a hole in the ceiling, and outside you can see a bird circling again, a little callback to his enjoyment of wildlife. And that's the end of episode 4. And you can probably hear in my tone there were some phenomenal moments in this episode, but the way that the way that it ends is on purpose. You end on a depressive note. You end coming away from it feeling things are unresolved, things are bad. That's the point, that you're supposed to walk away from this episode feeling that. The tone is rightfully like dark and desperate. The loss of Keyes, I really don't know what to make of, because Keyes is pretty central. He's a pretty central character to the storyline of Halo C. And if the Silver Timeline has the plan to even loosely follow the events of Halo CE, I don't know how they're going to do that without Keyes. So ultimately, his death means that his role will have to be filled by someone else. And this is where kind of a theory comes in that Miranda was said that she's alive, she's there, she's around, but she's not at High Comm facility. Basically, her whereabouts are classified. I wonder if they plan on having Miranda Keyes now as the captain of the Pillar of Autumn. Now, I know previously in season 1, Miranda Keyes was actually she was part of the Navy, but she was a medical scientist, so to speak. I wonder if Miranda is actually folded into the military side of the UNSC, and they plan on having Miranda be the captain. But then this in itself presents problems, because then that means, okay, so Miranda is now the captain of the Pillar of Autumn. Does that mean that she will meet her end on Halo, in the events of, so to speak, Halo CE in season 3 or season 4? If she meets her end there, then she's not going to be present for the events of Halo 2, Halo 3, when she was present. Or is she going to survive the events of Halo CE? In which case there then needs to be a lore explanation as to how and why that happened. And then she continues through the events of Halo 2 and Halo 3, Season 3 or Season 4, and onwards beyond that. I don't know. If she dies in Halo CE's events in Season 3 or Season 4, that's one thing. If she survives it, that's another thing. It's anybody's guess what direction it's going to go. The loss of Vanek, while I wasn't really ready for it, it highlights the cost of war and ultimately the desperation during the fall of Reach. And in the grand scheme of things, we knew going into this that Silver Team were going to go their different ways in one way or another. Chief has, so to speak, has to go to Halo alone, although now we have these different storylines. Maybe he doesn't, I don't know. Maybe he does go there with Riz, or he goes there with Kai, I don't know. But on the whole, we usually think Chief was the last Spartan. He goes to the Halo, and the story plays out from there. So we knew that Silver Team were going their different ways. I just, like I said, I wasn't ready for Vanek to be killed. Silver Team, I suppose, to be fair, not all of Silver Team were going to make it off of Reach, and the loss of what has quickly become a fan favourite character, Vanek, is a damn shame. McKee's storyline, I'm just psychologically shelving that for now, because we've been given nothing really to go on as to how she's suddenly back now when she was dead at the end of season 1. I'm just shelving it. In either case, the big choices that were made in this episode have done one thing, and I understand why these choices have been made. And I think the reason these choices have been made is because it leaves literally everything in flux. So the entire series of established events going forward now are questionable. This is likely done with the intention, because keeping things too close to the established lore means that we know what characters survive then. I went into this assuming Keyes was definitely making it off of Reach, because he has to be on the Pillar of Autumn, he has to take Chief to the Halo. I assumed that was just a given. Doing this serves to clearly say that no, everyone could... Nothing's guaranteed. Anyone can die at any moment. killing keys like this basically drives home that point that now everything that goes on in Season 3 and beyond that is now completely questionable. Because although Halo CE plays out quite centrally around the actions of Captain Keyes and the Master Chief, now that Keyes isn't in the picture, that leaves the entire series of events in Season 3 and for the Halo up in the air. And that, to a degree, is a good thing. It's a clever thing to do, because otherwise we'd go into it fully knowing what to expect, fully knowing what direction things are going to go in. Nothing would be a surprise. Killing off a key character that we thought would be present later on down the line leaves all of that in flux, especially because of how significant of a character Keyes is. So the TV show is clever to avoid us going into future seasons knowing full well what to expect. Changing things up like this and making things questionable is a wise decision in the long term, because especially if the writing is good for the long term, you do get some degree of emotional benefit down the way, but I think it comes at the cost of short-term unrest. With all of that aside, overall, fantastic episode. Absolutely fantastic episode. Plenty of combat, plenty of action. The continuous shots were brilliantly choreographed and played out really well. The series of events was really nice to follow. Seeing the disparate storylines come together was really good. The grittiness, the desperation, the doom that's kind of lingering over everything, fantastic. Everything was done to a T perfectly. Even the characterization of Chief in this one, like I said, there was those scenes where I could almost superimpose Chief's armor, but it felt like I could see through it as like a sixth sense or something. Shows quite clearly that they are in the right direction. Everything is surging ahead in the right direction. Fantastic. I'm just unsure in the short term of how they're going to reconcile those couple of points that I've highlighted in this video. Ultimately, I think it boils down to this. Fantastic episode. Some questionable choices, but ultimately this season so far has big themes of belief and faith. So I suppose in the same vein, I'll continue to have faith that whatever decisions were made for a reason, and have faith that they will pay off in some degree in the end. And that rounds out kind of my coverage of Season 4. A little bit longer for an episode that was only 45 minutes in length, but like I said, there was a lot to cover. Like I said, great episode, liked it. A few things not so sure on. Love to hear your thoughts on episode 4 and what you think that means moving forward, not just into episode 5 and episode 6 and the rest of this season, but well into the future, into like Season 3 and actually arriving at Halo. What does this mean? What are the ramifications of this? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Until next time.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider smashing the like button and leave a comment below on what you'd like me to cover next. Big shout out to my patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my installation, Falcon, Prophet Bear, Mikhail, Sophia, and Ashley, my dutiful monitors, Darian, Scarab, Spartan0137, Anthony, Ghost, Aaron, Chris, Jacob, Sean, Element Zero, Somatic, Jordan J3, Dan, Mr. Keys, Directal, Gunslinger, Jacob, Bandmill, Echo, Evermore, Officer Cat, and Personal Devil, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers. And all the other patrons who have jumped aboard to support the channel. It means more to me than I can accurately put into words. Another shout out to my Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members, Spartan137, Jacob, Schmitty, Talia, Fenrir and Born Stella, and all the other YouTube members keeping my installation running on that glorious vacuum energy. Shout out to John for I don't fucking know. And if you want more of this kind of content, hit the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you don't miss any future videos, and consider jumping aboard yourself as a patron or YouTube member to keep the channel alive and kicking. Thanks again for watching. Take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.